Hi everyone, welcome to your September 23rd e-learning day lecture. How's that for perky? Okay, so we finished with chapter 3 and listened to Hester 3 times refuse to tell the magistrates who the father of her child was. So that's important. She leaves the scaffold upset. She sees, the misshapen man that has told her to be quiet. She is recognized. The infant is crying. And at the end of chapter 3 on page 65, that last line is really important. This is part of the mystery that is going to surround Hester in the A. It ends with, it was whispered by those who appeared after her that the Scarlet Letter threw a lurid gleam along the dark passageway of the interior. First of all, those of you who have an A, that's important. Second of all, those of you with light and dark, that's important. But for all of us, it's kind of the mystery that the Scarlet Letter remains to have kind of a life of its own. That's 65 at the very end of chapter 3. And one other thing I want you to do is go back to page 59. So that was in chapter 3. Just as Hester 3 times refused to admit who the father was, the stranger, that misshapen man that she recognized at the beginning, on page 59, right in the center of the page, 3 times he says, he will be known, he will be known, he will be known. And that the he there is referring to the father of the baby. And again, this is said by the stranger, who we quickly will find out exactly who he is. So going to the interview, we're going to start off with some mirror imagery. And the idea of the mirror imagery here is that the baby is obviously very distraught in some kind of pain or discomfort at the beginning of chapter 4. And that directly, the baby's external pain directly reflects her mother's moral anguish. And so the jailer, she has to go back to prison for a period of time. And they call the stranger to town. He was actually lodged in the prison, they tell us at the top of page 66, because that just happened to be a place that he could stay for free until they could figure out what's going on. And he says that his name is Roger Chillingworth, and he also says that he is skilled at medicine. And he tells you that in the middle of page 66. Says, "Trust me, good jailer, you shall have peace in your house, and I promise you, Mistress Prynne shall herefore after be more amenable to just authority than you may have found her to." In other words, he's going to help out. He's going to calm her down. He goes to the top of page 67, and he says, "My old studies in alchemy," and that's the form of chemistry of medicine, "in my travels for the year past among a people well versed in the kindly properties of simples have made a better physician of me than many others could be." So he says, "The child is yours, she is none of mine, neither will she recognize my voice or aspect of a father." He wants to give Pearl some medicine to help her out. And he admits that Pearl will never consider that he is as her father. Hester doesn't want to take it because she knows who this man is. And then he says a few lines down, "Foolish woman, the medicine is potent for good, and were it my child, yea, mine own as well as thine, I would do no better for it." So he says that, even if this was his child, this is what he would do for his own child, and that he shouldn't be, she shouldn't ignore it. So then on page 68, he has her drink it, and then he has her, he touches the Scarlet Letter, and that's an important simile. It's right 2/3 of the way down, as if it were red hot. So if you'll go now to page 69, he says, thou hast ascended to the pedestal of infamy. We're continuing that idea of unity. If you go now to page 69, this is really one of the sweetest moments, if you can imagine that, between Hester and this physician. He's admitting that he is at blame, and actually, as we read through here, we discovered through this face-to-face conversation that this man of science really has a great deal of compassion, and we learn a lot about who they are really to each other. He says on page 69, in that first full paragraph, about 10 lines down, misshapen from my birth hour, how could I delude myself with the idea that intellectual gifts might veil physical deformity in a younger girl's fantasy? He's admitting that he thought his looks might, not that who he was as an intellect might overcome his physical state. And then she says, in her response, she says, thou knowest I was frank with thee. I felt no love nor feigned any. She says, I told you I didn't love you. And then he says, true, that is my folly. I have said it. But up unto that epoch of my life, I lived in vain. My heart was a habitation large enough for many guests, but lonely and chill. And without a household fire, I longed to kindle one. So he's saying, I know that I had no right. I know you didn't love me, but I was hoping that you were going to fall in love with me. And she says at the bottom of the page, 69, I have greatly wronged thee. And he says, no, we have wronged each other at the top of page 70. Mine was the first wrong when I betrayed thy budding youth with a false and unnatural relation. And then he says, between thee and me, this is important, between thee and me, the scale hangs fairly balanced. And yet then, if you go on down a little bit longer, then we have the whole idea of this, which is incredibly important, this whole idea of revenge. And he says, I shall seek this man as I have sought truth in books, as I have sought gold and alchemy. There's a sympathy that will make me conscious of him. I shall see him tremble. I shall see myself shudder, suddenly and unaware. Sooner or later, he needs be mine. He is swearing that he is going to find this person. He wants no revenge on her. He is going to find the person who is the father of Pearl. On page 71, then, he says, breathe not, that's about 7 lines down, breathe not to any soul that thou didst ever cause me husband. He says, I'm going to come in, I'm going to be someone different, and in fact, I'm going to make it my purpose to live and die unknown. Let thy husband be dead. Don't let anybody know who I am. As far as they know, he is going to be Chillingworth. And the reality is, his name is Roger Prynne, right? So now we have some secrets. The first secret was in the last chapter, and that was who's the father, right? And now the second secret is that Chillingworth is Hester's husband. So she's keeping a secret, he's keeping a secret. It's getting all a little messy. And now we have some plot development, finally. We had plot but it came with the novel. It kind of framed the novel with Hester's sin. But now we have the idea that we have the revenge of Chillingworth on Hester, right? We have Pearl, who is going to develop her own plot. And we have Hester with her secrets. All of this leads us into chapter 5. And chapter 5 is called Hester at Her Needle. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, Hester, that's her skill. That's what she is going to make her living at. And if you looked at the beginning of chapter 5 on page 72, this is where those of you with light and dark imagery, you know, she is, the doors thrown open and she steps forth into the sunshine with Pearl and with her Scarlet Letter on her. We've got some good figurative language in here. We've got some great symbols of the sin on page 73. The scarlet letters flaming on her breast, that kind of thing. She might have been innocent at some point, but she is no longer. Now, the thing about this world is she doesn't have a place to live anymore. It's all, she can't live in the city because the town, civilization, rejects her. So she is going to have to go find some place to live. And where she goes is on the outskirts of town. And she's going to have to really struggle. On page 74, lots of great metaphors and similes. Her sin, her ignominy were the roots which she had struck into the soil. It might be that she hid the secret from herself. It was like a serpent. We've already seen a serpent with, the snake going across the stranger's face when he saw Hester on the scaffold. Look and watch what he does with this as he... Hawthorne as he writes this novel. So she has to support herself with a living, and she does that with her skill, which is being a seamstress. So Hester is a seamstress, and she's going to support herself through her sewing. If you go to page 74 and 75, 76, it talks about her skill. And in fact, if you look on page 70, at the top of 76, it talks about all the people that she will sew for. Beautiful things, official state people, judges, officials, ladies. She'll make shrouds for the dead. Very powerful people. The one thing she will never be able to make is a wedding dress. And it says that at the bottom of page 76. It is not recorded that in a single instance her skill was called in aid to embroider a white veil which was to cover the pure blushes of a bride. She's considered, her sin is too great for her ever to be able to take care of that for somebody else. She has dressed herself very simply, it tells her at the top of page 77, and the only thing that is an ornament for her is the Scarlet Letter. However, Pearl is very different. Pearl is super fancy. She's always wearing red and draws, you like my picture there? They draw a lot of attention to her. So that's going to be problematic for Pearl later on. You could say that's another example of the mirror imagery, that you've got Hester being dressed in a very sober and plain method, and then you've got Pearl being very fancy in how she dresses. The result of all of this is that Hester feels very isolated. She's living in a cottage. She's outside of town. She's living by herself with Pearl. It's the worst kind of punishment that she could possibly have, because it's almost, she's shunned. New arrivals don't want anything to do with her. Everything, it's like she is completely tortured over and over by everybody. Clergy stop and address her. the word banished is used about her. New arrivals want nothing to do with her. Even at the top of page 79, she grew to have a dread of children, for they had imbibed from their parents a vague idea of something horrible in this dreary woman. It gave her great pain. She felt like everything, even the trees, and this would be the romantic mood, the romantic writing here, that the trees talked about the story, the breezes murmured it, the wintry blast shrieked it aloud, and yet, every once in a while, she would feel an eye, a human eye, you like my eye there, looking at her, and it made it tolerable. It gave her relief when she saw that person when she saw that person look at her. She felt an eye, a human eye, upon the ignominious brand that seemed to give it a momentary relief, as if half her agony were shared. The next minute, it all came rushing back. A deeper throb of pain. Had Hester sinned alone? Of course she had not sinned alone, because somewhere out there's a male who helped out with this. He shares half of her pain. And so she sticks around. She stays in Boston, not because she's necessarily strong, not because she thinks her husband's going to come back, because he doesn't, but because the man she loves is still there, and she doesn't want to leave, because if she leaves, then he's gone. He's out of her life. So that's the love story portion of this. The mystery still remains. So what's next? Well, after you've listened to this and done your best to try to go through the chapters and follow me and underline some of the quotes that I gave you, and I promise you, we will go over this briefly when we get back together. But I want you to do two things, and those two things are to be added to the Schoology assignment where you found this, the e-learning day assignment. Now, bear in mind, this is in addition to the test you already took, so it's different and separate. And I gave you some hints to some of these things as we were talking, but I want you to go back through in chapters 4 and 5. Hawthorne uses several different pieces of figurative language. I want you to find 3 quotes. Remember, a quote doesn't have to be a complete sentence. It can just be a fragment. But I want you to share those quotes with me in the Schoology assignment. That should be labeled point number 1. And make sure you have used the correct internal citation. And I want you to tell me what type of figurative language each quote is. Then the second thing I want you to do is Hawthorne continues to use mirror imagery to unify the novel. I want you to give me one example from chapters 2 through 5. That's not an example from each chapter. You don't have to do that, but I want one good example of mirror imagery, and I want you to tell me why is it mirror imagery. I don't have that written down there in number 2, but I'm going to see if you're listening. Why is your example mirror imagery? All right, great. Good luck. Have a great weekend. I'll see you next week.